Hello, and welcome to the first fall colloquium of the first year seminar. Before we begin, I would like to read the land acknowledgement. Lewis and Clark is located in Portland, Oregon in Multnomah County. Prior to the newcomers coming to this area, the indigenous land of this area was home to many tribal people. Today, we honor the indigenous people on whose traditional and ancestral homelands we stand. The Multnomah, Cathlamet, Clackamas, Tumwater, Watlala bands of the Chinook, the Tualatin, Kalapuya, and many other indigenous nations of the Columbia River. It is important to acknowledge the ancestors of this place and to recognize that we are here because of the sacrifices forced upon them. In remembering these communities, we honor their legacy, their lives, and their descendants. I have to acknowledge too that just before I began recording this introductory video, I opened and read an email that was informing the Lewis and Clark community about the results in part of the COVID testing that has been going on campus. And I just wanted to congratulate all of our first year student members of the community on doing such an excellent job staying healthy and slowing down the spread of this virus. I know that we are far from being safe, but I just want to acknowledge that in these tough conditions, you are doing a really great job of keeping yourselves and our community healthy. As I said at the beginning of the first year kickoff lecture, being safe and staying healthy and observing the public health recommendations that the experts are giving us are the quickest way that we are going to be able to get back to normal. So thank you for doing such a great job. And yes, please do keep taking care of yourselves and those that are around you. You might be curious. You might be wondering why the colloquium? What is it about? This must be just another add-on, maybe busy work associated with the first year seminar. The idea of the colloquium is to give you space, in part, to continue to have large group-wide conversations about topics that you are perhaps engaging with in the different sections of first year seminar you are taking. And we could think of no better way of kicking off those in-semester group conversations than to invite three people who I think you will resonate with a lot because our three panelists this time around are recent Lewis and Clark alumni. We're joined this time around by first Dylan Benitez, who graduated in 2020. Dylan was a biology major at Lewis and Clark, and he shares a little bit of his story and some of his experiences during his time here during the panel. So I won't give any of our panelists much of an introduction other than to tell you who they are. We're also joined by Georgia Reed, who also graduated in the spring of 2020, so a very recent graduate. And third, we're joined by Amy Williams, a 2015 graduate of Lewis and Clark College. Amy went on to Columbia University, where she got a Master's in Fine Arts in theater. And again, all of our panelists are going to tell you a little bit more about their stories. I reached out to these people on the recommendation of several faculty who teach in our first year seminar. And when I contacted them, I told them that I wanted to have a conversation with them about how they are surviving in this pandemic and protest world. And in particular, I asked them to reflect about both how the liberal arts education and in particular the general education curriculum here at Lewis and Clark related to the experiences that they're having now and how they see it connecting throughout their academic experiences at Lewis and Clark. I hope you'll enjoy our conversation and I hope you will resonate with some of the things that they have to say. Amy, Dylan, and Georgia wanted me to let you know that if you have any questions for them or if you want to hear more from them, you should just let me know and I will connect you to any one of them that you'd like to talk to.
Okay, it is my great pleasure to welcome you all to the first colloquium of the first year seminar here at Lewis and Clark College. I am so thrilled to be joined by three recent Lewis and Clark alumni. And here's the order in which we are going to meet them and hear from them. First is Amy Miyako Williams, and then Dylan Benitez, and lastly, Georgia Reed. I want to ask our panelists, I want to start off by asking our panelists this question. Can you tell us a little bit about yourselves? Tell us about your time here at Lewis and Clark. Then, if you don't mind, in a couple of sentences, relate to us what your experience since LC has been. And of course, because of what is going on around the world today, we want to hear a little bit about how you are navigating the pandemic and protest world that we live in. So if you could share a little bit about that stuff with us. We'll start off with you, Amy.
All right, so my name is Amy. I was a 2015 Lewis and Clark grad, so not too far out, but a little bit a ways away. And I was a theater major, rhetoric and media studies minor, and was pretty involved in the music department as well. And a little bit ASLC, did some SOB stuff there. I don't know if that's still the same acronym. But I was very, very involved with both performing arts and then loved rhetoric and media studies and what it had to offer there as well. And since Lewis and Clark, I went on to grad school immediately after Lewis and Clark and got an MFA in acting. And after that, so that's led me here to New York City, which is where I am now speaking to you all from. And I've been here since then, graduated there in 2018. And since then, well, actually during that time, some of my grad school classmates and I, we co-founded a production company called Squeaky Productions, which is, its goal is to amplify marginalized voices and underrepresented stories. And so with that, we took a show to the Edinburgh Fringe. We do some work with readings locally. And then during the pandemic, we've also done a little project there. But before we get to the pandemic, I was actually one of the, if we're talking about like general education in first year, so one of the things that I did while at Lewis and Clark was I took bouldering. And so I've been working as a bouldering instructor on the side for fun while here in New York pre-pandemic. And then also was working within the arts and entertainment industry as an actor, doing voiceover, doing commercial TV, theater, immersive world, kind of all those disciplines across there and starting to write. So in the pandemic, with all of this time that we have found and all of this great change and revolution and many, many ideas that have been happening, I've been taking a lot of time to slow down because I did a lot. I've learned was doing too much right before the pandemic. And in that slowing down, I've been taking time to write, to generate new projects, new ideas, reaching out to other people, learning about what I can do with my specific skills to contribute to what's happening right now. And one of those things we were just talking about earlier was the company that I'm a part of. We worked on a project that I directed with some medical students and used our voices as actors to share their stories in a video that I directed remotely in order to share that with their administration. So the students' experiences of discrimination within the medical world, start a discussion there. So it's been a lot of dialogue, it's been a lot of reflecting, and it's been a lot of slowing down. And I'm, thankful to be in good health.
Wow, it sounds like you've been busy. 5 years is not a very long time, but you have crammed in a lot there. Dylan.
Sure, real quick, I want to ask Amy, you said it was called Squeaky Wheels Productions?
It is, Squeaky Wheels with a Z, because honestly, because the S was taken.
Fair. Okay, yeah, I'll make sure to check it out. I am Dylan. I just recently graduated this past spring, so 2020, when stuff hit the fan. I was a biology major at Lewis and Clark. And so that was my major. I didn't have any minors. I intended to do a neuroscience minor, but sort of ran out of time. But above just a biology major, I tried to branch out as much as possible and do a number of classes. That's how I knew Kundai, because I took one of his rhetoric classes. And I took education classes. I took a class that I really loved called Experimental Fictions with Kristen Fujie in the English department. Highly recommend it. And so I tried to sample around, and what I learned through that process, I guess this is skipping ahead. We'll reel it back. Right now, I'm living in Dallas, Texas, where I'm serving at a school, at a local high school, and I'm doing a program called City Year. This is my little sweater from there. And basically what City Year does, it's an AmeriCorps program, and they place recent graduates or anyone past a high school education, mostly young people, in classrooms across the United States in 29 major cities. And we help out in underserved and underfunded schools. And so right now I'm serving in an Algebra 1 classroom at a local high school. What were the other questions?
I think that was it, Dylan. You told us about your experience here at Lewis and Clark. You told us about what you've been doing since then and what you were doing in the middle of this pandemic world, which seems to be what you were dropped into when you graduated. We're going to hear from Georgia next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Georgia. I was a double major, environmental studies and sociology, anthropology, or EMBS and SOAN. At LC, I actually took a gap year before going. I did a global citizen year, and then I started at Lewis and Clark for 2.5 years and declared my SOAN major, but hadn't yet declared my environmental studies major. And then took another year off and went to farm. That was the first time wildfire smoke really hit me personally. Like I understood sort of what it feels like, because I was farming through that at a small scale farm in California. And then I came back to Lewis and Clark, finished my 2 degrees and theses, and research, I would say, like participating in faculty research, but then gaining experience doing independent research was highly in feature of my undergrad at LC. Like Dylan, I graduated this May in 2020 into the pandemic and protests. And I have held, 3 jobs already. The first 2 I started, I was working with Wisdom of the Elders, which some of you may get to know. They're a partner organization of Lewis and Clark through SLS, Student Leadership and Service. And so I did a program with them doing more agricultural work, and also that's focused on supporting, and it's led by Native communities here in the urban area. And then I also, what have I done? I also have, oh, that's right. The 2 jobs I'm currently doing, one is I'm interning with the Oregon Department of Agriculture and the trade association that manages the Western US. So learning about agricultural exports. And then the other job I'm doing is I'm the data assistant at a company, Wisewood Energy, that manages and designs the transition for boilers, which is like a thing that creates steam or hot water to heat and energize pretty much all of our homes and buildings, and transition that to biomass by developing management plans for forests to clear out things that would turn into excess wildfire, and make that a source of fuel and energy. So that's what I've been up to.
Wow, that's really impressive, all of you, that you've ranged so far and have done so much in what seems like very little time, and in the middle of such chaos and pandemonium in the world right now. As you know, first year seminar is a class that's taken mostly by first year students at Lewis and Clark. And since you all represent those who came through Lewis and Clark and got out and are on the other end of the Lewis and Clark educational experience, I was wondering what you might have to tell yourselves, as if you were a first year student, knowing what you know about being a student at Lewis and Clark. What would you have told yourself now that you didn't know back then when you were at the beginning of your academic career at Lewis and Clark? And we're going to start off with Georgia this time.
Thanks, Kunde. As I was thinking about this, I realized my advice to my past self would be pretty simple. It would be two things. One is life goes on, and two is be courageous, especially when making friends. So to number two, I have always been, but a kind of shy, introverted person. And I think the compounding revolutionary changes going on right now related to both the protests around race and oppression and long-standing issues in our country, inherited issues, and also the pandemic and the isolating quality that has given us, shows me that friendships, and especially friendships where these hard conversations are trusted spaces to have hard conversations about race, about economics, about how we all interact, how we choose to make our spaces, what we are okay with, what to do when we're okay with different things in terms of contact or whatever. That's really important. And so I can imagine it being hard this year, to imagine how to build friendships. And so both to myself and maybe to all of you, it's like, know that that's hard, be courageous, and know that, like, I don't know, give everyone the benefit of the doubt and bring your heart when you're listening to others, I think is what I would say. What was the first one I said? I think it was, life goes on. Life does go on. And whether it's like a grade or this or that, I think that that's something to keep in mind, is like, there's always a next step, a next thing. And you can have faith that nothing has to be perfect.
That's such sage and kind and useful advice, Georgia. And I think it's true for those of us who aren't students as well, because we are navigating spaces and processes that we are not familiar with too. And it's good to be reminded that life does go on, and to be kind to ourselves and to be courageous and pick up things we haven't done before. Amy, what would you have told yourself, knowing what you know now?
Well, first of all, I love what you're saying about being courageous in making friends, and that sensitivity in general. Like, again, like, it seems it's hard to make friends in general sometimes, like when you're not isolated in your home learning from a computer. And I think what I would have told myself, and then especially to you all, it's such a different situation. And while I can't speak to that, I think that the sense that we're all here, everyone is in a very similar boat of unknowing. And that this uncertainty that you are having is very similar to the uncertainty that each other of the hundreds of other classmates that you have is feeling, and that is something that already you have in common. It's unique. These circumstances are unprecedented for the most part, in recent history, and that is already a shared experience. And while it's not important that every person that you interact with is someone who is similar to you, for obvious reasons, that is something that is so, like, you all have this as something that you can help each other through. Not to silver lining the hard parts of it, but that is there. And then also in terms of talking to myself at that time on a more academic note, I would have just said, take anything you want to do, just do it. Like, it can be as irrelevant as your aunt or uncle or whoever thinks it is. Like, sure, yes, family, people around you, they have your best interest in mind. And also, if they're in the room listening to this webinar, I apologize, but the things that I would have wanted to know are that it is going to be so much more important later on to have explored as much as possible. And those things not only will have come back to, like, serve my life after school, but they also have served my life while I was in school. So take the art of tea, take, like, rock climbing, take the origins of life in the universe. If you're like a SOAN major, it's all good.
I really like that, Amy. That's so great. Take everything, take all the classes, all of them. That's wonderful. Dylan, what would you have told yourself 4 or 5 years ago?
Sure. Yeah, I would have to echo a lot of what Georgia and Amy have already said about shopping around and branching out. I'll get to those, but my very first one is that there are words to describe everything in your life. There's words to describe everything that you're feeling, everything that you're going through. Find those words. This is an idea that I got from Kundai's class, actually, called his class was called Race, Rhetoric, and Resistance. And one of his points in that class was that America has what's called an aphasia with regards to race. And aphasia is a psychological term that is basically the inability to speak about something, or inability to talk, or on the flip side, inability to understand speech. And so Kundai argued that America is in this interesting rhetorical position where it is unable to talk about race. And I think we're seeing that happen on a national scale, where we're starting to have some very difficult conversations that we've struggled with since our inception, and since before our inception as a country. And so with that comes also, to take it back to a personal level, there are things that we go through. So for me, my example is imposter syndrome. So I suffer from imposter syndrome, which is the feeling that you're not good enough, you're not qualified for something, that you shouldn't even apply to something because you're not good enough, or someone else deserves the position more, etc. And that's a real thing that people go through, and finding out that there was a word for it was incredibly empowering for me, because then I could start to address it and look at it and say, okay, maybe this is a problem, maybe this is something that I can work on. So yeah, that's the first thing, is that there are words to describe everything. Find those words. The second one echoes some of what's been said, but shop around outside of your major. And when I say shop around, I mean actually shop around, because you're paying, this education is worth thousands of dollars. My advice for that is to talk to friends who are taking classes, and if those speak to you, or just click around on WebAdvisor, just different, that's how I found Kundai's class, actually. I just clicked around on WebAdvisor under different, what are they called? Programs, different types of courses, programs, majors, different majors. And then just like scroll through and see if any of those speak to you. And then thirdly, get involved, which echoes what Georgia was saying about being brave and getting out there. It's fine to take on too much, and just go out and just take on as much as possible. And then in time, you'll be overwhelmed. So just cut certain things out. And I'm talking like clubs and different social groups, all that stuff.
Thank you, Dylan. That's very kind of you to say, and to encourage us to express ourselves and to find voice for the things that we do experience. Because sometimes we go through stuff and we think we're not the only ones. And I think I heard Amy talking about this. Academe and academic experiences can be isolated and isolating. It does not have to be that way. It does not have to be that way. All right. So thank you for answering my two questions that I had. I was wondering if you might have questions for each other, things that you think our first year friends might benefit from hearing you all talk about. I think we're going to start off with Amy this time.
Yes, thank you. So I have this question, which is something that we always ask when we're creating any kind of new performance piece, especially when you're trying to get someone to get on board with your idea, and often for getting yourself on board with your idea, which is why this and why now? And in this context, I have a little fly in my apartment here. In this context, this would be your Lewis and Clark education, and now being the obvious of now. So why do this? Why now?
Sure, I can jump in. Let's see. Why Lewis and Clark education? Why talk about it now? I think there's a lot going on in the world right now, and it's a lot to digest. And I think that coming from Lewis and Clark has given me a variety of different perspectives from different disciplines on how to unpack and how to digest all this stuff that's coming in now. So I talked about Kundai's class and rhetorically analyzing race and seeing how that maps onto, the current day protests or stuff like that. Did I have more thoughts? No. Georgia, you want to go ahead?
Sure. Yeah, that's that might bleed into the question that, or what we'll get into, I think. But what you say about having various ways to think through, I think, is really important. I think of it as like a toolbox, and to all of our points so far, to Amy's point, like take everything. It really is unique to Lewis and Clark, and the I think maybe a feature of the amazing professors and also the smallness of every department in general, is that you can get a good taste of a whole way of thinking from one class pretty well. And so it really is worth making those leaps. And why this, why now? Something I think of, I've not studied theater in my after high school, basically, sort of, but I'm remembering, actually that's not true. When I was in California doing that farming thing, I was doing theater at nights. But so what I remember there was the stage as being a place that refers back to you what's going on. It's a mirror, and you put something on stage. The answer to the why this, why now is is this what we need to be chewing on and living through via the art, that is on the stage, via the experience that's conveyed. And so in some ways, maybe what Lewis and Clark is a really important learning space for how to think through, how does this mirror back? Who has the tools for, as you were saying, digesting what's going on? And absolutely, I found, however hard it was to keep up with everything, while doing academics, it was invaluable, and it felt like I always had this cherished thing when I was in classes while things were going on in the world. So perhaps it's a really good reflective space.
Amy, that's such a great question. I often encourage people to think about, find your why for doing what you're doing, for being where you are. But I think adding the notion of time to that question, why now, really puts us in touch and with the world beyond ourselves, right? And makes us think about the communities that we are part of and we are members of. Dylan, do you have a question for Amy and Georgia?
Yes, I do, as a matter of fact. Could I tack on something to the last one as well? I was just thinking, and I was sitting here in this city year uniform, and I took a class at Lewis and Clark called Education in a Complex World, and that opened me up to a whole, and that's one that I found out about through a friend who was like, this is a great class, you should take this class. And that opened my eyes up to just the world of education inequality, and that whole realm really spoke to me as a person of color, as a student of color, who was learning basically that a lot of my experiences were shared among people, and that as someone who's experienced some of those, I can then turn around and serve that community, or various communities with a more informed perspective. And so thinking about that now also in terms of pandemic, and how a lot of students who are now online, like in high school, middle school, elementary school classrooms, the ones who are struggling financially may also be the ones who can't afford a laptop or Wi-Fi or all the different things that are becoming increasingly relevant for schoolwork. So that's something that my Lewis and Clark experience directly mapped onto like what I am doing now. Yeah. Okay. So moving on to my question. Amy, did you have a response to your own question as well?
Oh, well, I mean, yes, I do. um, for me, Lewis and Clark is a place where I really learned how to be very wrong and have my ideas change and have that not be a reflection of my character, and to understand that this is a place where we're here to learn how to continue learning. And part of learning means that you didn't know that thing before you got there. And that doesn't make you a bad person. It just means you didn't know that thing before you got there. And ideally, we all go to study something somewhere to learn things that we didn't have before we got there. And so at this particular moment in time, where I think there's a lot of pressure to have all the answers, to know things, to be an expert on things that not everyone has had access to, and learning how to continue learning and how to take a pride in being wrong, and to take corrections with grace and to offer corrections with grace. That is something that I learned. I really think I just started to learn at Lewis and Clark, and then was able to continue working on since then, and will only continue to get better at, because it's an evolution. So thank you for pointing that question back to me.
Yes, I'm glad I asked. That reminds me of the growth mindset and the idea that no one is inherently good at things, or even if they are, everyone can improve if they put in the sort of the work and they're exposed to it. So my question has to do with the fact that one of us is a bio major, that's me. One of us is a theater major, and another is an ENVS SOAN double major. And all of us were invited to this panel by an RHMS professor. So completely different from all of those fields. And so we all have this shared experience of interdisciplinarity, I can say it. And so I'm wondering, like, what do each of us think that offers in terms of education, and I guess how does that serve us going into life after Lewis and Clark?
Well, Georgia, I can jump in first if you don't mind.
Sure, go for it.
Great. Yeah, the interdisciplinarity ended up being that I did my theater thesis based on something I learned in my first year exploration and discovery class. Or do you just call it first year seminar now? Or is it still E&D? I don't know.
It's first year seminar now.
Okay.
We retired E&D.
My first year seminar. So it was my second semester first year seminar with Jerry Harp. And we were talking about Plato, and there was a particular character in there who really resonated me. And then my theater thesis ended up being a one-woman show about that particular character. So there's ways to be inspired by all of these different things, which is why I'm like, take everything, because one thing always informs the other. You don't sharpen a knife on another knife, you sharpen it on a stone. You need something else in order to make that thing really come into its full potential. And they all inform each other. Like, this idea of getting too broad, in my personal opinion, is a myth, because something will inspire an interest. And for me, it was that I loved all of this mythology, all of the dialogue, all of the rhetoric and media studies, and like rhetorical theory, all this old stuff. And then also I kept thinking about how it related to current topics, and what kinds of stories I wanted to tell from that. And especially with particularly in theater, and in Kundai's class in rhetorical theory, and then also the race, rhetoric, and resistance capstone that you mentioned, Dylan. A lot of my focus came into the relationship between race and casting, and how the casting is also a rhetorical tool that we don't really talk about. So it's, what kind of story do we see just by who we see on screen playing a particular role? And so that's become a very obvious part of my life now, navigating the industry that I am in. And it is something that I learned outside of my major, and is something that in grad school, I met so many students, fellow students, my classmates who went to other programs, who did, not to compare or anything, but who did go to more conservatory style programs and weren't able to take broader classes, who didn't have those resources in terms of understanding that there's a broader context for the thing that we're doing. And it can be very limiting to just be on one track, but it all serves you, and then you serve the world around you in a different way.
That's awesome, Amy. I would add, or the first thing I find myself reflecting on is that although choosing to double major seemed like a good idea, and it could be a good idea, it also limited me, because by halfway through my college track, it meant that all the rest of my classes, higher level, were decided in these two departments, which turned out fine. But that's something to think through. Like, if you are inclined to like have let's see, it could be an overachieving mindset by like defining yourself, putting, these programs, like 3 programs or something after your name, that like there might be time for that to come in future. And I might, if I did it again, I might just choose one so that I could have more leeway. Other than that, I also ended up taking a course with Kundai. It was one of the few in the second half of my, coming back. Actually, maybe the only course that I took outside of those 2 majors. And it ended up being so theoretically juicy that I tried to weave it in and made it a cornerstone of my thesis, which I ended up trying to theorize why, like justify why environmental people inclined toward environmentalism need to broaden their approach and put conversations across that bridge differences at the pillar of what they do. So I used, public sphere theory and counterpublics and all of that to try to articulate this thing. And like, I only want to work on that more these days. I'm like, that would be so great to continue. So Amy, what Amy said really points out like someone already doing interdisciplinarity, someone already like bringing this one idea from here to there. And so that's exactly it. That's what it is all about.
Dylan, you taught me to do this, so I'm going to turn your question back on you.
Oh boy. Okay. Yes. Well, first I'd start off by Thank you both for your answers. And those resonated deeply with me. I think definitely at Lewis and Clark, and Georgia, I guess you could speak to this. You get into, Amy, what you call like the specialization track, right, where you just stick with the one thing, and that, you know, that is valuable. And I think that's what a lot of parents and a lot of elders see as like the way to succeed in this world as it's evolving, is to have a lot of specialists. But for me, in order to understand my field of biology, at least, I had to go elsewhere to different fields, different programs of study. And my last semester, I ended up doing an independent study with Dr. Tamily Weissman. That was biology, but it was writing about biology and seeing how biology interacts with society and race and all these different dimensions, and how that comes into biology. And then also the fact that, like, I guess just undoing some intellectual hubris that comes with some of the STEM fields, is that STEM and like empirical data science isn't the only way of understanding the world. And a lot of what we do with STEM fields is statistics, which means you get a p-value, and I guess all the first year students will learn this next semester and how to do all that stuff. But it is sort of wishy-washy when it comes down to it, because science asks a question and then it creates the probability of the answer being true. And then we assign a lot of value to that number, but it doesn't inherently have a lot of value. And we change the number based off of what discipline it is. So there's a lot that goes into science not necessarily having all of the answers. And so you need, or I felt that I've needed other departments, other disciplines to examine what goes into science.
Friends, you do such a great job of articulating the importance and the value of a liberal arts education and the importance of exploring broadly. Can I just have you in my office when I start doing advising conversations for the spring? These are such good responses to this question. I think we're on to Georgia. Do you have a question for Amy and Dylan to answer first before we turn it back to you?
Yeah, so Amy, you mentioned taking this character from your class with Jerry Harp in what was then A&D, but first year seminar, and bringing it all the way to fourth year capstone. And I wonder from both of you, what you would say the relationship between your general education in that first year was to your later academic and continuing academic career.
In terms of like the first year seminar itself, if it's anything like when I was there, that would have been 9 years ago. It was a very wide range of texts. I'm telling you what it was when I did it in case it's different, so I don't want to say that if it's something different, if it's to make a statement about it. But we started with a very similar first semester, and then the second semester it went into something, it was a little more delineated in terms of where it went. And my first semester class was, it was a religion umbrella under that topic. The professor was a religious studies professor, and that concept, those sorts of foundational tools, then going into the second semester, having an understanding, because I didn't have a very broad understanding of how religion played into anything. And while we were all reading the same texts as a general first year class, having those discussions through that kind of lens was interesting. Then having that understanding going into the second semester, when I don't remember what it was called, but it was Jerry Harp's class. With these, it was all about the Greeks. There was a lot of Greek. There was a lot of we did Martin Buber, I and Thou, and it was about relationship. and relationship to dialogue and how we have conversations between one person and another. And that concept is what ended up coming up for me as a theme in all of my classes since then. I can say, like, at Lewis and Clark and beyond, like, how do we have conversations? How do we relate to things that are not us? How do we relate to ourselves? And something that I think is really valuable about going through such a wide range of older literature in particular is that it's a way for me to refer back to something in story form that is happening right now, because I am very story oriented. Humans tend to be very story oriented. And so knowing that there's something that happened in the past or an idea that is pre-existing that can offer itself as a framework for what's happening now, I find very comforting. And then also came up in other classes, like I mentioned Origins of Life in the Universe before, if it still goes by that name or exists, but like science classes, like what's the story here? How does this relate to that? And then it allowed me to learn. So that was a pretty roundabout response. So I hope something in there made sense.
Yeah, no, it did. You mentioned in the second half of your response a lot about stories, and that was something that I took away, I think, from the Gen Ed syllabus, was that there are many different ways to tell a story. And I got this too from just talking with friends some of whom did, I think it was an E&D. Okay, we're not allowed to say E&D. A first, we can say E&D.
You certainly can refer to END. It's what you took. The people that are here now are taking first year seminar. You definitely could talk about END.
Okay, so when I was back in my day, we took E&D, Exploration and Discovery, and one of them that a few of my friends took was centered around memoirs, and they read a bunch of different memoirs, and they shared their memoirs with me that ended up being like what they produced for that class. And that has been a form, a narrative form or a style that I've been using recently to understand and unpack my experience. And so, yeah, just the idea that there are many different stories to be told, and then there's many different ways to go about telling them, I think was a key takeaway for me.
All right, Georgia, it's your turn to answer your own question.
Thanks, Kundai. The two courses that I took were, first year seminar was with a history of philosophy professor, and it was realism and relativism, which basically was assessing, like, is everything true or is nothing true? Which stuck with me. And then the second semester was on war with an international affairs professor. And I would say that there's like no easy way to put those things wrap them all with a bow. Other than they both, like I said earlier, I think were opportunities for one class giving a good perspective to me, learning like, oh, that's how this would think. Oh, I don't know if I think about the world in terms of war, but this has been valuable. So some things feel awkward once you do them, and then you move on. But so my gen ed, like, it did seem like it was a little, I was like, I don't know how this is going to fit in, but in retrospect, it can fit a little better. Like, I think realizing I would never choose to study war other than that has been valuable to lean on what I did learn and open me up to that topic more. It's like I'm more willing to learn it because I was part of that conversation early on, sort of de facto. So
I really appreciate both sides of the answers I'm hearing from you. Both the fact that there's stories out there in the disciplines and the general education curriculum gives you a way to expose yourselves to different ways of listening, to the different stories about the world in which we live in. And sometimes it comes together that way and it makes sense, but at the same time, sometimes it doesn't come together neatly, and we don't quite get why we're taking this class in or reading this particular book right now. And that's part of the process too. I think sometimes we get too anxious for it all to come together right now. And I love what you're saying, Georgia, about I didn't quite get it, and it didn't have to come together then. It will in due time, and I think that's really fair. Um, Amy, Dylan, and Georgia, I want to thank you so much for taking time to, first of all, spend time with me. I haven't seen all of you in a while, so it just does good to my soul to see you all again. Thank you for sharing your experiences here and reflecting on what the general education experience at Lewis and Clark has meant to you both as a student here and beyond, and also reflecting about your educational experiences in general. I am so thrilled to hear that you are doing well in the circumstances that are out there. And I guess that's one of the things to talk about too, is the fact that things can be crazy, but I think we will find a way through it together. And you three just model how someone who is a lot of the students that we have in first year seminar right now can look forward to being. So thank you so much for extending your time, your talents, and your stories with us. I hope if you hear from any of the students who are watching this, you will extend your kindness to them too, and talk to them. So I want to encourage first year students, if you have questions, get a hold of us. I will pass on our three panelists' contact information. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to staying in contact with you all and developing your stories and looking forward to seeing them unfold. Okay.